Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to give you the top 10 armies of 2018. I went back and watched all of my top 10s from 2018 and put together this list based on how many times each army appeared in those top 10s, meaning the armies that appeared the most have a higher spot on this list, and their placings on those lists was the tiebreaker if it was needed. The game has gone through a lot of changes in 2018, and from going through my older videos and looking at lists from early 2018, things are almost completely different now compared to what they were back then in most regards. So I figured it would be interesting to make this video and take a look back at how the game has evolved over time. So without wasting any more of your time, let's just jump right into what you guys and gals came here for, and that is the top 10 armies of 2018. Number 10, Thousand Sons. The Sons of Magnus were featured 5 times on my top 10 lists, with their placings on my top 10s being 1 3rd place, 1 5th place, and 3 6th place finishes. The army has gone through a lot of changes throughout 2018 and would make Tzeentch proud. In early 2018, the Thousand Sons weren't really seen as a competitive army, and there wasn't any placings for them to prove otherwise. It was only after the first big FAQ that Thousand Sons started to shine because of the changes to how Smite worked for them. When the beta rule was implemented that said each consecutive cast of Smite made the warp charge value go up by 1, it was pretty much the death of any hope the Thousand Sons had to do well, since they are a very psychic heavy army. But with the first big FAQ, this rule was changed to exempt Thousand Sons and Grey Knights, which meant Thousand Sons and Grey Knights could smite as many times as they wanted to without suffering any penalties. Once this change was made, the Thousand Sons started popping up on top tables of events, which led to them being featured on my top 10s. The reason it worked for them and not Grey Knights was because Thousand Sons characters get a normal smite, while Grey Knights including characters only do 1 mortal wound per smite, which is one of the things that held Grey Knights back while Thousand Sons prospered. As for the armies we've seen, there have been quite a few variations. Early on in 2018, we saw Magnus a lot, almost in every list, but eventually Thousand Sons became Ahriman plus 3 Demon Princes as a staple in most Chaos lists, and sometimes they would include Zangors, more Sorcerers, or even Cultists to make cheap battalions. Primarily, they used to use Cultists as their screen, but eventually Plaguebearers were brought in as allies to screen for the Sons, which is pretty much how most Sons lists are played today. Number 9. Ultramarines. The poster boys for Games Workshop made this list by having 6 placings on the top 10 list from 2018. They had placed 6th twice, 7th once, 8th once, and 9th 2 times. To be honest, all the placings were pretty early on in 2018, when there wasn't many codexes in existence yet, so they kinda won out by default since they were one of the earlier codexes. This is what I believe held most armies back in the beginning of 2018, because we were still missing a ton of codexes and most armies being played were just using index rules, which put them at a disadvantage since stratagems and army traits are a big part of what makes the top armies the best. As for how the lists have changed over the 2018 year, well, they've pretty much always used Guilliman, as he is one of the best characters in the game, giving full rerolls of failed hits and wounds, which is actually pretty nutty when you think about it. He also has 9 wounds, so he slides just under the limit for being able to be targeted, which meant he could hide behind his troops for more safety. And when he did get put into danger, he has a natural 3+ invulnerable save and a 2+ armor save, which meant he was pretty damn resilient. And on top of that, he hits like a truck and can take on pretty much anything, including Titanic units in close combat. Besides Guilliman though, the other units we've seen used are Devastators, Smash Captains, Razorbacks, Scouts, and Scout Bikers. As for the lists that are used today, they look very similar and haven't really changed much from what I've seen, only now they aren't getting top 3 at events anymore. They often pop up in the top 10, but they haven't really seen any top 3 placings since the beginning of 2018. Number 8. Deathguard. The favorite of Nurgle come in at number 8 on this list, with 6 placings on my top 10 list during 2018. Their placings on those lists were 1 3rd placing, 1 4th placing, 3 8th placings, and 1 9th placing, which led to them winning the tiebreaker over the Ultra Smurfs. The lists used by Deathguard have been vastly different from each other, with a few exceptions as well, and we've seen a good variety of their units from the Codex see play on top tables, probably more than any other army from what I've seen. In early 2018, there were lists with Mortarion, Deathshroud Terminators, Plague Burst Crawlers, Plague Marines, Predators, Poxwalkers, Cultists, Chaos Lords, Typhus, Demon Princes, Sorcerers, Malignant Plague Casters, and Foul Blight Spawns. Later on in the year, the lists eventually turned into more of an elite style list featuring Plague Burst Crawlers, Blightlord Terminators, Demon Princes, and Forge World Dreadnoughts like the Leviathan, Contemptors, or Daradeos, with Mortarion being replaced by Renegade Knights. The army can be very strong with the disgustingly resilient rule, which is one of the things that makes Deathguard so resilient. On top of that, they get rapid fire at 18 inches instead of 12 inches, which helps a lot since a lot of their units are generally pretty slow. And they can move and fire heavy weapons normally, which is amazing for things like Forge World Dreads, and makes them very efficient, especially with a Demon Prince or Chaos Lord nearby to reroll ones. Overall, I think this army is well deserving of a spot on this list, and I'm glad to see them here. Number 7. Imperial Knights. The Imperial Knights are on the list because they were featured in the top 10 6 times, with 3 third placings, a 5th placing, a 6th placing, and an 8th place finish. Most of these placings were in the latter half of the year though, after Imperial Knights received their new codex. They were seeing a tiny bit of play before the codex, but afterwards just shot up in popularity and in the rankings. The codex made almost everything cheaper, and also introduced us to what we called the baby knights when they were teased, but we now know as armigers, and the dreaded Castellan Knight. Knights became super popular as well because of how cheap it was to build a whole army. You could make a full Knights army for around 600 bucks, which is pretty cheap when compared to armies like Orcs or Guard who have to spam a ton of infantry that don't cost many points. And on top of that, Knights were also pretty damn strong. They changed the meta a lot because for a while people were skimping on bringing anti-tank options because the meta was mostly just hordes, and for the armies that had infantry and tanks, well, if you just annihilated all the infantry with your massed anti-infantry, well then you just had to bad touch the tanks so they wouldn't be able to do anything for the rest of the game. But with Knights in the picture, that definitely changed, because if you only brought anti-infantry and planned on tying up the vehicles, well, you can't really tie up Knights since they can leave combat and still shoot or charge, or the Knights would just murder you in close combat with a super chainsword, or they would just river dance on your unit with their stomp attacks. The Castellan was pretty popular and still is to this day. In fact, it's so popular and something that I think is a big problem for the game that I am actually in the works of making a video talking about my thoughts on the Castellan and how it affects our meta in a way that I feel is negative. The Castellan is one of the most used allies in the Imperium armies and has seen some changes with the second big FAQ, but it wasn't enough to hold this Titan back, and it's still dominating tables even today. So if you're interested in that conversation about the Castellan, then feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and that video will be up in another week or two depending on my schedule and if anything else pops up in between now and then. Number 6. Tao Empire. The Tau had 7 placings in the top 10 lists of 2018, with 2 third placings, 1 5th placing, 1 6th placing, 2 7th placings, and an 8th placing. Tau have been pretty consistent throughout the whole year, and went from being a dominant army in the beginning of 2018 to kinda disappearing for a bit, but then coming back in full force in the latter half of the year. Early on in 2018, the Tau lists were made up of commanders and drones. That's it. Commanders and drones. 11 commanders on average to be exact. It was the only time in history of my channel where I've actually complained about spam, because normally I'm okay with spam, but bringing 11 commanders with drone support just seemed a little cheesy even for me. For those of you wondering, how the hell did they bring 11 commanders with the rule of 3? Well, for those of you that don't know, in early 2018 before the first big FAQ, there was no limit on how many times you could bring each unit. It was only after the first big FAQ that this was changed to how we have it now in the game, which is that we have the rule of 3, meaning you can only bring 3 of each unit. Except troops and transports, which are exempt from this rule, to promote armies that look like actual armies with troops, since troops didn't really see all that much play in the beginning of 8th edition, and Games Workshop wanted to change that. And I personally have loved the change and think that it did great things for the game. Some people spam troops now, but at least their army looks like an actual army, instead of 11 commanders with a bunch of drones. Also, battalions only gave 3 command points instead of 5, which wasn't too big of a difference to make troops appealing. And with most armies not having a codex, those command points were really only used for rerolls anyways, so there wasn't really a need to bring troops at all. But anyways, back on topic for the Tau. So they started out with lists that spammed commanders, and then with the new rule of 3, and with the release of the Tau Codex, which went even further to limit commanders to only 1 commander per detachment, we started seeing less commanders. As for the rule that was implemented in the Codex, that only allows 1 commander per detachment, I believe this was done because you could still get away with more than 3 commanders, because there are multiple different types of commanders, so this was done to kill commander spam once and for all. After those changes, the Tau community was pretty vocal about their disdain for the changes, saying stuff like Tau would never hit top tables ever again. And it turns out they were very wrong. Tau came back with the Triptide list and spamming sniper drones alongside fire warriors, and it did pretty well in the latter half of the year after people tried new things and discovered Tau wasn't as bad as most players initially thought. Number 5. Tyranids. The Zerg are the 5th best army of 2018 with 7 placings on my top 10. They had a first placing, 2 second placings, 2 third placings, an 8th placing, and a 9th placing. Kind of like Tau, early on in 2018 the Nids were dominating by spamming Hive Tyrants, with some lists bringing 5 to 9 of them. This was then changed by the implementation of the Rule of 3 in the first big FAQ, which meant you could only now bring 3 Hive Tyrants. Kinda like the Tau community, the Nid community was very vocal in saying that this wasn't a fair change, and that Nids were now doomed to never top an event again. And yet again, those people were wrong, and Nids have proven that they are still a force to reckon with. After the change from the Rule of 3, Nid players started trying out other units and doing fairly well with them. Gene Stealers became a staple in most lists, with stuff like Hiveguard and Exocrine supporting from the back, with some lists using the Swarmlord and others opting to use more Gene Stealers instead, and of course the Hive Tyrant still making an appearance. Another thing that the Nids benefited from was the Brood Brothers rule, which allows them to be played alongside Gene Stealer Cult and also regular Imperial Guard. This combo was done a couple of times during 2018 as well, which did see some success. In the latter half of the year though, Nids were mainly used as allies alongside Gene Stealer Cult, and to be honest, I feel like that's the way to play them going forward. They can still do well as a mono codex army, but almost every army in the game benefits from bringing allies if they have the option to, so I believe that that option is the best for Tyranids, at least as of now. Number 4. Jakari. The Dark Eldar come in at number 4 on this list, with 7 placings on my top 10s in 2018. They had 3 first placings, a second placing, a third placing, and a 5th placing, and 2 7th placings. After the release of their codex, Jakari was the first and only army to ever get first place on a top 10 list immediately after their codex release. And this was with the help of myself, since I used Jakari the month after its release and placed second with the army at an ITC major back in June. Jakari went on to dominate for another couple of months, but then fell back down in the rankings once people figured out how to play against the army. Jakari was very strong when it was first released because most people didn't understand how to play against them, with them being insanely fast and hard hitting. And also people didn't understand how to play around the stratagem Agent's Effect, which is the only stratagem in the game that can outright cancel an opponent's stratagem. This was huge for the game and led to Jakari getting a lot of victories immediately after their codex was released because people just weren't prepared for it. And also, they countered a lot of the meta at the time, which was mainly Nids and other infantry-based armies. This was a perfect army for destroying the enemy screen in 1 or 2 turns, and then using Venoms to tie up all the vehicles afterwards. Or against armies like Nids and Tau, their poison damaged literally everything on a 4+. Also, Jakari has access to bringing Eldar allies, which can make up for Jakari's main weakness, which is the fact that they don't have any Psykers. So you can bring a Farseer and a Warlock to get access to Jinx and Doom, which are some of the best spells in the game and synergize really well with Jakari and their poison weapons. This spell pretty much allowed the army to pick 1 enemy unit a turn and delete it off the board. With my own Jakari list, I've killed Knights, Tesseract Vaults, Gene Stealer Blobs, Orc Blobs, and Conscripts all in 1 turn because of these spells. And the meta wasn't prepared for it, which is what I believe led to Jakari being the best army in the game for a few months. Then the Knight Codex was released and people started adjusting their lists to face Jakari, and the army fell down a few spots, but is still regarded as one of the better armies in the game. As for the builds throughout 2018, it started out with mainly being Kabalite forces paired with Eldar Psykers, and then in late 2018 shifted towards Covens alongside Eldar or Harlequin forces. Overall, I'm glad the army did so well in 2018 as it's one of my favorite armies, and I'm glad that my 2nd place finish at an ITC major helped them get there. That's definitely my proudest accomplishment of my 2018 season. Now before we get into the top 3 armies, let's go over some honorable mentions. These armies were all featured on my top 10s in 2018, but just weren't featured frequently enough to get a spot on the top lists of 2018. So we have Admech, Sisters of Battle, Blood Angels, Black Legion, Grey Knights, Gene Stealer Cult, Orcs, Alpha Legion, Necrons, Nurgle Demons, Custodes, Deathwatch, Harlequins, and Iron Warriors. So if you play any of these armies, don't feel bad because they did make the top 10 at some point during the year, with a few of them happening late into the year, so there are still decent armies even today. So now for the top 3 armies. Number 3, Craftworlds. Alongside their Dark Brethren, the vanilla Craftworlds get a pretty high spot on the list as well at number 3, with 10 placings on my top 10s in 2018. They had 4 first placings, 3 second placings, 1 5th placing, 2 6th placings, and 2 7th placings on my top 10 list in 2018. The Craftworlds Codex is arguably one of, if not the best codex released by Games Workshop so far, and it gave us a great variety of units to see played like Dark Reapers, Shining Spears, Crimson Hunters, Hemlocks, Guardians, Rangers, Farseers, Warlocks, Wave Serpents, Swooping Hawks, Wind Riders, Wraithguard, Spirit Seers, and Eldrad. Early on, the Eldar list had some variety in them, but towards the end of 2018, it really just became Dark Reaper spam alongside a couple of big units of Shining Spears, with either Rangers or Guardians, a few HQs, and normally an Airwing detachment with either Hemlocks or Crimson Hunters. The army has also been played alongside Jakari, Harlequins, and Inari as well, and with their success spanning pretty much all of 2018. There was only 2 months where they weren't on the top 10 list, so to say the least, the army has been fairly strong for all of 2018. The Craftworlds that were used the most would be a Laytok for that -1 to hit trait, and also Ulthway for the 6+ Feel No Pain, and also to be able to gain access to Eldrad, who is one of the best characters in the book in my opinion. Overall, I'm glad Craftworlds are doing so well, but unfortunately, I now need to talk about another army that uses Craftworlds. Number 2. Inari. Inari have been doing consistently well in 2018, with being featured on all of my 12 top 10 lists from 2018. They had 4 first placings, 3 second placings, 1 fifth placing, 2 sixth placings, and 2 seventh placings on those top 10s. Inari is the only army on the list that hasn't really gone through many significant changes in 2018. For example, the list that won the LVO at the beginning of 2018 is still seeing some play today, although it does have a few slight variations because of points being adjusted through chapter approved, and also because of the release of Harlequins in the Jakari Codex. But overall, the army still uses Shining Spears in big units, still uses Dark Reapers, although they did go from 3 units down to 1, and it still uses Cat Lady alongside other HQs. Later on in the year, Inari started bringing a spearhead of Ravagers from Jakari to gain access to Agent's Effect, and also because Ravagers are pretty damn good. And some lists even used a couple units of Harlequin bikes, although that variation wasn't nearly as popular. There was also another variation with using Jakari Coven units alongside the Inari, but that was because the missions for that tournament were different from the normal ITC missions, and bringing the durable Coven units helped with that type of scoring. Overall, Inari has been pretty much the same for the whole year with a few variations, but as some of you may already know, I really dislike the Inari faction and think the Soul Burst mechanic in its current form is kinda broken. It's basically a free round of shooting, charging, attacking, or moving for 0 cost. Most armies that can either shoot twice or attack twice, or move a unit after shooting with it, they usually have to pay command points in order to do so, but Inari just get to do that stuff for free essentially. Sure, you could argue that the cost is having to kill an enemy unit within 7 inches for your Soul Burst to trigger. But I mean, you want to get that close anyway since the range of your Shining Spear's guns aren't that long, and they're going to kill a unit anyways since that's the point of the game, is killing your opponent's stuff. But then after that, they get to Soul Burst away to safety. So you're basically just allowing them to play aggressively, get up in the opponent's face, but then they get to play defensively at the same time, which makes 0 sense to me. Especially because killing a unit is just something that you want to do anyways, so to me it doesn't really feel like a cost, and more or less it's just a freebie. But anyways, enough about this army, and let's talk about the best army of 2018. But before we get into the best army of 2018, I need to pay my bills. So this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com and 9.5 Miniature Painting. The Magnet Baron offers magnets of all sizes, magnetized movement trays, magnetized flight stands, and a bunch of other Warhammer 40k related goodies. So if you're looking at magnetizing models for ease of transportation, or just to change a loadout on your minis, then check out themagnetbaron.com. And for 9.5 Miniature Painting, it's an up-and-coming painting studio that does great commissions for a relatively cheap price. I had him do some work for me, and I couldn't be happier with how the minis turned out. So if you have a pile of gray minis that need to be painted, or you just want a few characters done up really well, then consider going through 9.5 Miniature Painting for some great commissions. I will have a link to the Magnet Baron and 9.5 Miniature Painting in the description. And with that said, let's get into the best army of 2018. Number 1. Astra Militarum. The Imperial Guard are the best army of 2018. They were featured on all 12 of my top 10 videos in 2018 and received 4 first placings, 3 second placings, 1 fifth placing, 2 sixth placings, and 2 seventh placings on my top 10s. Guard have gone through a bunch of different variations and lists through 2018, but really started gaining a lot of traction in the latter half of the year with the release of the Castellan Knight. Early on in 2018, Cadia was regarded as the best regiment and was seeing the most play. But once people realized the power of Catachan infantry and re-rolling the amount of shots on certain vehicles, Catachan proved itself to be the best regiment the Imperial Guard had to offer. In the beginning of 2018, Guard was played alongside a bunch of different factions in competitive play, including Blood Angels, Custodes, Ultramarines, and Sisters of Battle. Towards the middle of the year, Guard was played alongside a Castellan Knight and a battalion of Blood Angels almost exclusively, and dominated for a few months until the changes were implemented in the second big FAQ, which changed the way command points were refunded, which is now that you can only refund 1 command point a battle round, but before this change, the Guard could sometimes refund up to 6 or more command points a turn because of the Grand Strategist Warlord trait, the Kirov's Aquila relic, and the relic for the Blood Angels. This led to the Guard Blood Angel Castellan list to never run out of command points, while pumping out a ton of command points for the Smash Captains to attack twice, or to make themselves go up into Deep Strike and get a 3d6 charge, and for the Castellan to always have a 3+ invul, and reroll 1s for everything when shooting, which includes number of shots and the damage. The second FAQ then changed the CP regen, but also made the Castellan and Blood Angel stratagems more expensive, so you can't run the same list with the same efficiency it once had, which pretty much killed that specific list. But the Guard adapted and now run a brigade, plus Custodi Shield Captains, plus a Castellan, since you can fund the Castellan for 3 or 4 turns, which is more than enough to win the game or get a big enough advantage to lead to the victory. And the Shield Captains don't really need command points to be efficient for their points. There are a few variations of that list, but that's the most popular one that I've seen, and that list is still doing well even today. Throughout 2018 though, we've seen a bunch of different regiments including Cadia, Catachan, Valhallan, Deathguard Krieg, and Talarn. So they were very diverse for a while, until it slowly became Catachan everywhere. Sure, we see Valhallans or Cadians popping up here or there, but it's mainly just Catachan now. This army, in my opinion, also benefited the most from the first big FAQ, where the rule of 3 was implemented and where battalions and brigades gave more command points. This made spamming Guard troops more appealing, since they are exempt from the rule of 3 and are cheap enough to fill a brigade pretty easily. And with spamming troops, it pretty much sealed the deal for Catachan infantry to be the go-to, since you can get them up to 3 attacks each at strength 4, while easily filling out a brigade with the units that do this. Overall, I'm glad the Guard are doing the Imperium proud, since the top 5 armies are all Xenos except for the Guard. So I'm happy they are doing well, although I wish we did see a bit more variety from them, although to be honest, with the current state of the meta, I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it and want to see other videos like this, then feel free to like this video and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content. Also, if you want to help support the Almost Pro Gaming channel to allow me to continue producing content like this, then consider becoming a patron through Patreon. There are many different tiers to choose from with varying prices, and they offer all different rewards, which include stuff like exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, basic coaching and list critiquing from myself through the Discord channel, advanced coaching and voice chats with myself, and there's even a tier where you can pick a topic for a video that you would like me to cover. So if any of that interests you, or you just want to help support the channel so I don't go out of business, then please consider making a pledge on Patreon. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming!